It's the Free Relief Golf Podcast. Thanks to the Blue Wire Hustle program, this is the place where listeners can explore the hidden cost of elite amateur golf. It'll always cost nothing to get some free relief, so let's get on with it, shall we? Welcome back to the Free Relief Golf Podcast. I'm Freddie, and as always, I hope you're safe and well. If you've been following along with this series of podcasts of the Free Relief Golf Podcast, which have been covering my costs across all the big tournaments that I played in 2021, you will know that we have now covered all of the major tournaments I played in 2021. So we are now in the fortunate position of tallying up the costs throughout the season that we accumulated to see how much it cost us overall to play in those tournaments. This is going to be a short episode. Let's get straight into it. Now we're going to begin summarising the tournaments that I played last year by ranking them first via overall experience rating and then by cost. So for those who need a reminder of what the overall experience rating is, of course if you listen to every episode you will understand this, but a refresher for those who don't know. The overall experience rating comprises of 11 elements all rated out of 5 to give an overall total of 55 points. Now those 11 elements are as follows: hospitality, practice facilities, practice round offering, course condition, course layout, course setup, organisation, communication, location, parking and weather. All of those factors have an influence on how much I enjoy the tournament and the overall tournament offering. So to begin with, we're going to rank the tournaments by overall experience rating. And here comes the chart. So in 6th place, got it's like top of the pops on the charts. In 6th place was the South East of England Links. It scored 47 out of 55. And just above it was the Scottish Amateur with 49 out of 55. And then just above that, in 4th place, just missing out on the medals, was the Tennant Cup in Glasgow, 49.5. It beat the Scottish Amateur by 0.5. And then beating the Tennant Cup by 1 to get the bronze medal position, it was the Eden Tournament with 50.5. Just above that, in 2nd place, silver medal position, St Andrews Links Trophy, scored 52.5 out of 55, only losing 2.5 marks. But it wasn't enough to be the best overall experience of any of the tournaments I played last year, because the best overall experience went to the Regional Open qualifying at St Anne's Old Links. It scored 53.5 out of 55. To be in 6th place, to be in final place, it was 47 out of 55. They're all still great tournaments. We're just picking the minor differences between them all to see what's worth playing and what's not. But I would still say that all of these tournaments are well worth playing. Nothing is scoring terribly. But interestingly, given travel and accommodation requirements, the costs of those tournaments just mentioned did fluctuate quite a bit. So, in 6th place was the St Andrews Links Trophy. It cost me £86.51. And of course, I was staying in my own accommodation, wasn't having to travel at all. It was always going to be cheap, especially with the entry fee being as low as it was at £60. It's then followed in 5th place by the Tennant Cup, which only cost £120. Tennant Cup, as I said, in Glasgow. And just above that, £127.95 was what the Scottish Amateur cost me in Aberdeen. Interestingly, despite being based in St Andrews, the 3rd most expensive tournament that I played last year was the Eden Tournament. £150 total that cost me, despite not travelling and needing accommodation. And then the bulk of the costs for the season were of course the 2 events where I travelled the most. The South East of England Links cost me £504.58. And the most expensive tournament of the year, despite being the best overall experience of any of the tournaments I played, was Regional Open qualifying. With its £150 entry fee, it still cost me £662.65 for the privilege of playing it. So let's dive deep into those numbers right now, because there's a lot to unpack. The total cost for my big 6 tournaments across the season was £1,651.69. And of that £1,651.69, £580 of it went in entry fees for an average of £96.67 for each tournament entry fee. So that means once you look beyond the entry fees, the additional hidden cost for me last season came to £1,071.69 for just 6 tournaments. Just 6 tournaments. So on average, each tournament cost £275.28. Can you tell I've been using a calculator for this episode? So the average cost was nearly £300, and that was when I was staying with friends and being prudent with food costs. So what we're seeing here is that entry fees generally count for just under 1/3 of the total cost of a tournament, i.e., if you see an entry fee, multiply it by 3, and that's roughly what an elite amateur event is going to cost you once you also account for travel and accommodation. But that's only if you've got friends and are prudent with food. If you don't have any friends, as I've been tracking throughout every episode, I do the cost of what it actually costs me, but also the cost of what the total price would be for outsiders looking in, needing to stay in Airbnbs or hotels and needing to pay for actual meals out or takeaways every day of the tournament. The costs are substantial. Buckle up for this, because this shocked me. If we're looking at the ranking, we'll rank the 6 tournaments again, but we'll base it on Premier Inn rates for accommodation and £15 a day food costs. So the Tennant Cup would be the cheapest out of all those tournaments. It would cost you between £340 to £380 to play as an outsider. Quickly followed by the St Andrews Links Trophy, which would cost you £445 to £500. Just missing out on the medal places. I'm not sure anyone wants a medal in this category, but a Scottish Amateur, for someone travelling from further afield and not staying with a friend, of course I stayed with my friend Wayne for that week in Aberdeen, it would cost you £651 compared to the £127 that it cost me. And then the South East of England Links in Kent would cost you £581.08. Regional Open qualifying actually wouldn't be the most expensive with full accommodation and food, based on the tournaments that I played last year. Regional Open qualifying would have cost £752.75, based on if I was making it to final qualifying and staying in the hotel that we did stay in. But actually, the most expensive tournament for outsiders is the Eden tournament, out of the ones I played last year. Because of accommodation in St Andrews in the height of summer, in August, it's summer holidays, the Eden tournament could cost you anywhere between £795 to £1,334 if you came up here for 9 or 10 days to sample everything that the tournament had to offer. That is a substantial cost, and we're going to talk about that. So the total cost for you playing these 6 big tournaments across the season, you with no friends and having to pay full whack for accommodation and food, the entry fees stay the same, £580, average of just under £100 per tournament. But the total cost would be between £3,564.83 and £4,198.83. That's the range that we're looking at. So the average cost per tournament, are you having a guess? Between £594.14 to £699.80. Basically between £600 and £700 per tournament. By staying with friends and managing food costs, a reminder that my average spend per tournament in 2021 was £275.28. So on average, I made a saving of between £318 to £424 per tournament. So by staying with friends, I managed to reduce my overall costs by between 54 to 61% of what they would have been if I was friendless and spending all my time in hotels and restaurants. In reality, for most elite amateur golfers, they do not have these support networks. They may share accommodation to lighten the financial load, but hotel accommodation is still expensive, and food costs will always remain consistent, as you cannot reasonably split your portions and costs every meal, obviously. So those were the nitty-gritty numbers. I'll just give you a second to process those, and when we come back, I'm going to go through some final reflections and lessons learnt from my season going into the 2022 season. See you in a second. Right, welcome back. I hope you're still with me. I hope you haven't fallen off your chair or fainted or anything crazy, because those numbers are substantial, I would say. The headline here: you need to avoid unnecessary travelling and stay with friends where you can when playing these elite amateur tournaments. Accommodation costs, be they hotel or Airbnb, quickly add up, and even though they feel worth it at the time for the sake of adventure, the numbers clearly demonstrate that this is an unsustainable way of chasing the dream as an elite amateur golfer. You need to surround yourself with friends and team up with them where you can, so you can spread the cost and the financial burden between you. Some tips that I would say, and some of these are obvious, but it's still got to be said. Where possible, plan tournaments where you do not have to stay overnight, i.e. a reasonable driving commute away from where you live. Now next week I'm going to be doing an episode from Craigmillar Park, the first episode of the 2022 season, and I had a practice round with a guy who is from Glasgow. Craigmillar Park's in Edinburgh, and he was committed to doing the drive up for the practice round and drive back every day, and that was the best part. Was between 2 and 3 hours of driving every day. So while that's a commitment in terms of petrol, that was a reasonable tournament for him to play, because although over the weekend it's going to cost him between 6 and 9 hours of his time travelling, it's probably still a cheaper way of doing it than actually trying to find a place in Edinburgh to stay. So where possible, playing tournaments where you do not have to stay overnight. But if this is not possible, sometimes the drives are just going to be too big and you're going to have to stay in places. You've got to find a place to stay which makes home cooking possible. So preferably an Airbnb setup rather than a Premier Inn setup. It's so difficult to be able to eat well when staying in a hotel or a Premier Inn, as you only have a kettle available to you and there's only so much porridge and pot noodle you can eat. With inflation as well, it's been well documented that the cost of food is rising and will only continue to rise in the near future. So we need to find alternative arrangements, and cooking for yourself in an equipped kitchen is the best way for nutrition of your body and wallet. It clearly can't just be out to Nando's every night. It's not sustainable. Okay for a treat, but over the course of the season, that's going to add up. So it's good to have a kitchen, and where possible, as I've said, you just need to stay with friends and share the accommodation. Goes without saying that this makes financial sense, but a space will cost less if more people use it. But also a flat for 3 or 4 people is going to be more spacious and generally more pleasant to stay in during a trip. So it just makes sense to go for bigger spaces with more people. I would say the main thing you should take away from all of my 2021 tournament experiences is this. It costs a significant amount of money to compete in elite amateur competition. I know I've just bamboozled with pounds and pence figures, but the main thing is it costs a lot. These numbers, we're talking in the thousands, and that is substantial for people who aren't earning lots of money coming back in. They're putting a full-time commitment into their games, and without the support, they haven't got the money coming back in. To play in elite amateur competitions, it costs significantly more than the entry fee. And to be fair, everyone already knew this. But hopefully this series of podcasts have been able to demonstrate exactly how much is necessary for an elite amateur golfer to have behind them before embarking on a full schedule of national competitions. Like I say, these 6 tournaments could have cost me between £3,500 to £4,000. In the end, they still cost me £1,600, even with savings along the way. And while I've gained experience in return for that, I haven't gained anything financial in return for that. And up until this year, you've only been able to earn vouchers back anyway for golf shoes or minor pro shop purchases. You haven't been able to make cash back to fight against the losses. If you don't have friends to stay with and cheap food arrangements, the entry fees could potentially only make up between a fifth and a sixth of the total cost of the tournament. Or to put it another way, for a £100 entry fee tournament, your total cost will be between £500 and £600. With savings, as I was going about achieving last year, a £100 entry fee tournament will still cost you between £250 to £300. And I'm not sure anyone out there has ever found these numbers out before. So this is a true worldwide exclusive as far as I know. And what do we know? Well, what we're finding out is amateur golf is expensive. But luckily, the changes in the rules of amateur status by the R&A and the USGA, go check out that podcast because that is a useful podcast. That was one of the first ones I did, the proposed rules of amateur status changes for 2022. But now the changes in the rules of amateur status have happened. They mean that, amongst other things, elite amateur golfers may seek cash funding however they wish and not just rely on unregulated and inconsistent gifts being handed to them. Amateurs may now also win cash prizes in amateur and professional events, providing that the cash prize does not exceed £700. So that means you can earn a bit of money back now. That's what's different for 2022. I would say right now, such modernisations to the rules of amateur status, they're much welcome and arguably overdue, but they're valuable and necessary steps in the right direction so as to enable elite amateur golfers to be better equipped and able to fund their golfing journeys. I hope you found this 2021 tournament series useful. It has certainly opened my eyes to the hidden cost of elite amateur golf events, and I hope it has done the same for you. Ultimately, that is what the Free Relief Golf Podcast has always been about. If there's anything major that I've missed out that you would like to have heard or that would have been useful for your future planning or even my future planning for events, then get in touch with the podcast. We're on Instagram, we're on YouTube as the Free Relief Golf Podcast. So follow and subscribe to those for all future episode updates. And you can always get in touch with me personally at freddielawrence.golf@gmail.com. I'd always love to hear any feedback you have to make future episodes specific to what you'd like to hear. That's a wrap on the 2021 season. Next time the 2022 season begins, but until then, I've been Freddie, you've been lovely. See you next time.